good thing for India is it has a good education system when it comes to technical jobs. And so if we are continuing to see the advancements in technology, then India might be the place, to still drive this.
Welcome to the GBS Masterminds podcast, the one and only platform for global business service leaders to share their experiences of building world-class shared service organizations. My name is Sashi Narahari, founder and CEO of 𝗕𝗂𝗢𝗍𝗂, and I'll be your host. Today, I'm honored to host Jana Vondran, a recognized member of the SSON and the Customer Experience Program Advisory Board at University of California. Jana is a global business services leader with over 20 years of experience, who's also responsible for managing shared services back in her days at Siemens, and is currently leading Ingram Micro's Global Business Services as Senior VP. Jana, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Sashi, thank you so much for having me. Delighted to be here.
All right. Maybe, Jana, we can get started about yourself and your career journey. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I grew up in a very small town, 𝗕𝗂𝗏𝗂, in the former East Germany. And when I say small, I really mean small. It's about 9,000 people. When I did an apprenticeship in hospitality management in Berlin and moved afterwards to London, where I worked both in hotel and event management. But I figured out early on also that I didn't want to work weekends and holidays. And so I went to college instead. I studied international business in Berlin and Cambridge. And with my dual degree, there was a one-year internship, which I conducted in Siemens in the US in logistics consulting. They offered me a job after college, which was an easy one. And as they say, the rest is history, but not so much. I worked for Siemens for 17 years, where I started my career as a business process consultant. Worked there for a few years and ended up running the consulting group for North America. Then started procurement BPO in the US, similar to 𝗕𝗂𝗢𝗄𝗏, and ended up running supply chain shared services for the Americas at Siemens. In 2017, I got asked by Ingram Micro to join them and run their global shared services. And what interested me in making this step after such a long time with Siemens, it was, on the one hand, running a global, business really, but also it is not a typical shared services. It's much more that we provide actually our services to customer and vendor partners of Ingram Micro. And so our services are part of the commercial arm of the company. On the personal side, I divide my time between San Clemente and the Bay Area. That's where my husband works. We got married only 2 years ago. Both of us, I would call a little late bloomers, as it was the first time for both of us to say the I do's. Then from a hobby perspective, I love to travel, love to read, mostly fiction, so not too much in the business books. And I eventually would like to have a dog, but I can tell you with all the travel, that is not something that is probably anytime close. So I'm actually the crazy neighbor that will pet any other neighbor dog when available.
All right. So a small town in Germany, did you say it's 𝗂𝗏𝗏, 𝗂𝗂𝗏?
Yep.
All right. Exactly. Small town in Germany to hospitality to now you're GBS leader of Ingram Micro. So congratulations. We're super excited to have you here. I'm going to start with the dead or alive questions. Yeah, that's the thematic. So we would love for you to be bold and blunt in these answers and what the other guest community would like to know. So the first question is around, based on your experience in a decade from now, do you think the BPOs for outsourcing will be dead or alive?
I'd say I go with alive, but I'd say it will look very different. I think the BPOs need to focus on true automation, away from the transactional services, and really think about how can they provide more value from a service perspective, maybe even advisory services, right? How can they provide more value to their customers so that it doesn't just become around scale? Because I do believe that labor cost arbitrage as the main lever will be over in 10 years from now. And so the BPOs really have to evolve so that they can provide the value that a single company maybe cannot provide on its own or create on its own, right?
So labor cost arbitrage play dead, outcome-based contracts, drive transformation value. Every industry has to evolve their business model, so that will likely be the case. Awesome. All right, we'll go to the next dead or alive question. This is around the large centralized service centers, that be it captive or outsourced providers. Now that we have also had COVID effect and all kinds of discussions around work from anywhere, what do you think? Will the large physical service centers be dead or alive in a decade from now?
I think they will be dead. At least the common large-scale center setup as we know it today. I think what we are seeing specifically, we've seen it with COVID, right? People want to have that flexibility. But I also think as an organization, as the centers will have to go transform themselves rather into smaller centers of collaboration, of centers of expertise. And I mean, we know the war on talent has been going on for quite some time. Where the talent is, where we are closer to those kind of talent resources, I think that is, from my perspective, probably more the way that we will see it. So less larger centers, but more a community of smaller satellite organizations. I also think the whole gig economy will play a part. It will help companies because our business isn't always stable, right? We have as a business fluctuation, seasonality. And so think about Uber drivers more, that we might be utilizing in the business operations as well. I really think it will be much more aligned with where the person is in their stage of life. You have young professionals without any family commitments and constraints who maybe work like really hard because they're building the career. You have young families, right, who are focused on a family life and maybe need a little balance. And at some point you will have empty nesters who will figure out for themselves also what they want to do and how long they want to work and what they want to still give or how much, kind of balance they want in their life. So I think it will look very different.
That's a really good one. So it's almost like you're talking about diversity in a different form, right? Not in terms of how we all look or which region we are on, but different stages of life. And talking about gig economy, it's interesting. I was talking to this Uber driver on a ride last week. And he said he just works late night Fridays and late night Saturdays and Thursdays because there's a lot of traffic. He makes all the money. And then the rest of the week, he just does something else. So it's a very interesting way to do a selection of work time and a very odd time. But then it's just the choice of the freedom of individuals, I guess, right?
Yeah. And as I said, I see that similar where we could take this from a GBS perspective, from a center perspective. If you think about many businesses who have that seasonality month end, or Fridays, it's a lot of Thursday, Friday work, or there is, more in certain months of the year. And so if you have people who can be able to adjust to that as well and say, you know what, there are certain days in the month where I'm willing to work, 10 days, but then others where I'm just taking it much slower and will not put in as many working days into that. I think that will come, and the technology is getting better and better to actually allow us and allow the workforce to take their voice and become much more heard on how does it fit for me personally, that, kind of like finding that right balance.
All right, we'll go to the third dead or alive question, Jana. This one is around RPA and automation tools like UiPath. There is a lot of hype as well as there are a lot of successes and failures. My specific question is around the tool as it is today, which is mostly like an as-is screenflow automation. In a decade from now, will it be dead or alive?
So I would say in its current form, which I consider more macros on steroids, I think it will be dead. RPA and companies like UiPath, I think they are already recognizing this and are evolving to bring more connected automation to the table. And that's what they need to do. I think when we all started RPA, I think the promise was 30 to 40% baseline automation. I don't think we are seeing this. And it's not because of the technology. It's because how our processes are currently being structured in many companies. So what we are seeing more is probably more like 15%. And it's due that processes aren't streamlined. We aren't all this end-to-end process harmonization, structure that we all hoped or wished we would be. And so I do think that RPA and the companies around this need to evolve. They need to get into machine learning. They need to get into AI. They really need to make the jump to bring more automation to transform the overall system structure, process structure, rather than a task automation, because that isn't bringing us the ROI that we are expecting.
Got it. Interesting. So I think what you're saying is it's 10 to 15% because it is able to automate, but it's a specific task. But if you think about an end-to-end process, whether it is hire to retire, procure to pay, order to cash, it's much larger. So you need different types of capabilities to come together for the macro business process. Is that correct?
100%.
All right. My next question of dead or alive is also another technology, which is AI, which you just mentioned. Now, AI is interesting. Companies are making big bets, Google's and all of them. But my question is more specific to GBS. And then knowing that GBS is typically addressing a set of business processes. In 10 years from now, Do you think AI is a lot of hype and will it be dead, or do you think it will be alive?
I'm hoping it will be alive and kicking. No, I think it will be alive. I think true AI at the moment is still very rare. As you said, there are a lot of companies who are putting big bets into that. It's still very rare. Everyone has been talking about AI over the last few years, but when you really think of what you've been seeing, it's still coming, right? It's still slowly coming to life. So I do think in 10 years, we should be seeing a much higher maturity from a tech perspective. And it will be part of the structure in any shared service GBS organization, because it will really help us to get to a much more predictive mindset rather than just acting and reacting, right? I mean, the role of the GBS might change to becoming much more predictive and driving customer value. So yeah, I have high hopes for AI, and I'm looking forward to really seeing it implemented and thriving in our GBS organizations, because I do think it will bring so much more value that we can then drive for the business itself.
All right. The next question is on India as a service center location. Yeah, you have managed different shared service centers across many functions and even geographies. So as you know, in India, the wage increases are very high. The inflation has always been high. Right now, the inflation is high globally, but historically, India has had an inflation of 8%. Do you think, given those continuous increase in costs, India is a top choice for service centers, be dead or alive?
I might make a lot of enemies with saying this now, but I do think it's going to be dead. And again, also taking some of the aspects that I mentioned before in terms of the large service centers in itself, right? Will they be there? And so I do think labor arbitrage, again, will become less and less important. And so it really depends on what services the centers are offering. How can they make that transition, this, kind of from a transaction center into value services? The good thing for India is it has a good education system when it comes to technical jobs. And so if we are continuing to see the advancements in technology, then India might be the place, kind of to still drive this. But as I said, like when it comes just to the normal shared service, outsourcing kind of India, big, large center, I don't think that will be the future anymore. I have currently a big center in the Philippines, and I would say, like, if I look at the Philippines, they are very good when it comes to voice services. You might have India from a more technical perspective. So I think it will be a mixture of really smaller centers that are focused on really the competencies and where the resources are.
I think what you're saying is each country is, based on their local situation, will evolve a certain set of skill sets, and maybe India will be evolved better on tech side, but not as much on the operations processing, versus maybe like a country like Philippines would be more on the voice. And it's almost like how individuals have core competencies and specializations. In a decade from now, countries and regions might also have that. And you, as a GBS leader, is going to pick and choose what's best for you.
Exactly. And I think that's a really good point. If you think about the evolution of the workforce and really that decentralization of centers, it will be up to us as GBS leaders to make sure we pick and choose based on the needs for our particular organization.
All right. And the last dead or alive question is the fate of GBS itself. We are all part of it. I know this is hard to answer, but what are your thoughts in a decade from now, dead or alive?
I do think it will be alive, but different, right? So again, it's GBS as a concept of centrally driven and managed business operations, I think will be alive because we still need that. But what it looks today versus what it looks going forward will be very different, again, from my perspective. It will change greatly. So the GBS will become your chief administration office. I think it will be much more automated. So teams, smaller and leaner teams managing the automation, managing the continued transformation and streamlining of those operations, exceptions, and really the customer experience. If you think about it, becoming much more with AI and other technologies, becoming a driver for predictive analytics, providing our customers already what they might need or what they would like to have answered.
I like the title Chief Administration Officer. I know there is the CEO role. It's been tricky. It's kind of fading a little bit, actually. If you look at the software industry, the CEO role is not the same anymore. You also have an evolving Chief Transformation Officer. What do you think of that when you put them all together? Any thoughts?
You're right. I think the COO role is unfortunately more fading, right? We don't see it as much anymore. And we're seeing more the chief transformation officer. And that's a good point. Maybe it becomes kind of a combination going forward because it will be about continuing that transforming.
On a closing note, what is your advice to other GBS leaders?
I would say to anyone, keep your eyes and ears open. Be open and see what the technology is doing, what you can incorporate in your organization. I would also say, don't be afraid of disruption because it's coming no matter what. I would say just stay on your toes and, be open to what can come and just really start thinking about not just, because I love your questions because it's not just what's happening in the next 2 to 3 years. What do we think could happen in 10 years? And that's really, let's keep that focus on the future and the vision and really work towards that. And I would say for younger people, it's a great area to be part of. I think GBS and the whole shared service environment gives people a great overview and insight into many functions and really how to run a company. I know on the surface, it's not always the sexiest. I really think if you want to truly understand how to run a business, this is a great way of involving yourself in the dealings of any company or any industry, really.
All right. That right there is a message to all the young gen who will be listening to this podcast. I know you all think about marketing, sales, finance as your profession. But I think if you look at, Jana, your own career, you started off as a process engineer, right? You're looking at business process engineering and you're a GBS leader now. So there is different paths for career success. So Jana, this has been a very insightful conversation. Thank you so much. It has been a delight to have you on the GBS Masterminds podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, 𝗕𝗪𝗓. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I'm looking forward to continuing listening to the podcasts and learn more about where GBS is going.
All right. Thank you.
That was the GBS Masterminds podcast. For more information, visit gbsmasterminds.com and make sure to search for GBS Masterminds in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at High Radius, thanks for listening.